morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here today to introduce our SGS webinar, How Do We Improve Our ESG Sustainability Scores? Today's webinar will cover a brief introduction into who SGS is, 5 drivers for North America, 6 frameworks and standards, 5 rating agencies, how to improve your ESG scores, and an opportunity for Q&A. My name is Kim LaFrancois, and I am the Regional Sales Manager for the industrial sector here at SGS. I've been in the testing, inspection, and certification industry for nearly 10 years, working with many different clients throughout various industries. The other speaker joining me today is Adam Hammes. Adam is the ESG Director at SGS and has 20 years of experience as corporate ESG sustainability consultant, author, and instructor. Adam has founded multiple organizations and comes with an MBA with international education and leadership experience integrating ESG, CSR, and sustainability into corporate strategy. I'll now pass it over to Adam so we can dive right in.
Thank you, Kim, and thanks everyone for joining today. It says, is it possible to turn off or down the hold background music? It's a great question, and Michaela, and we will ask Summer in the background, but I don't think I was lucky enough to hear that hold background music, so that's probably a technical question. Hello everyone, my name is Adam Hammes. I'm excited to be here today. This is a topic that it's very near and dear to my heart. That's why I work in this industry and why I work for SGS. So let's talk about who SGS is. You're probably aware, but we're a purpose-driven company. Our mission is to enable a better, safer, and more interconnected world. If you look at sustainability and ESG, it's embedded into who we are from a values standpoint. Our CEO is actively involved. It's one of our principles of business success. We have specific committee, board level management and governance of this issue integrated throughout what we do. And we have long-term incentives tied to our top management linked to sustainability. So we believe in this and we try to walk the talk. We are not new to this arena. We have done sustainability, ESG, depending on what people called it over the years, for 25 plus years. We've only been at the forefront of almost every initiative globally. And so we've participated in designing new certification schemes, being the first accredited in some of those schemes, launching some of the first services and things like sustainability report assurance. We've been on working groups, we've been accredited. We work with almost every principle. It says here the Equator Principles, Higgs BRM. That's only one example, Alliance for Water Stewardship. So the list goes on, but one thing that we think is more important than just telling you what we do is we look, like we ask many of our clients to, is for third-party verification. And so we have recognized sustainability leadership year over year, really raising the bar in any area that you can be scored by a reputable organization. We have a platinum rating with EcoVadis. We're Dow Jones Sustainability Indices leader for 8 straight years. Actually, I believe we were just, I know it changes from time to time, but we were just at the top of the list, which happened last year as well. So we're very, very high on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We have a prime rating in our industry from ISS. We have a AAA risk rating from MSCI, where Sustainalytics has a very low risk rating. And then CDP, we're a leader with an A- rating. And the list goes on. We're carbon neutral since 2014. And if you go check out our website, you can see other things about the company. So the first question I have for the group, and please take your time, look at it and answer, but it's pretty simple. It's, does your organization have an ESG score from any of the major rating agencies? Have you noticed? Maybe you yes, maybe no, and maybe you don't know. Maybe you haven't gone onto those websites. But I will tell you as the answers start to come in, that we do, as I've shown you, and that we also, a lot of folks don't know that it's publicly available information. So anybody can go search for your score. So right here, what we have is from the answers, about third say yes, half say no, but then a lot of people don't know. And so you would be actually an easy company if you're a privately held company, except for EcoVadis, which we'll explain in a while. But it is definitely not staying in the public sphere. We'll talk about that as we go. And it is now definitely impacting private firms as well, and we'll talk about that. So let's talk about the drivers. And today's webinar is obviously how do we improve our ESG sustainability scores? I'm from SGS North America in the knowledge division, so we are going to focus on North America. And I will tell you that we're not always at the same on par. There's a little more further down the road in Europe, in South America, in Eastern Asia. But we're going to talk about the U.S. and Canada for the most part here today. And the number one driver for ESG, if you're talking about the larger environmental, social, and governance, which is sometimes referred to as sustainability, if you're talking about all of them, then this is it. The investors and lenders seeing these scores, valuing their decision making when it comes to buy, sell decisions or lending. Sometimes it's yes or no lending to a company, or sometimes it's discounted rates and how much capital costs for that company. And they're basing these more and more off of ESG scores with these different agencies. We'll talk about them more in depth, but the most popular ones are DJSI. I shouldn't say popular. The most reputable are DJSI, MSCI, ISS. I threw CDP in here for context later, but I want to be very specific. And so I said ESG. CDP, when you talk about their carbon questionnaire, it's purely a scoring agency for climate, which is one environmental issue, whereas ESG is talking about all environmental, social, and governance issues. But Sustainalytics, EcoVadis, all very high level ESG scores, and sometimes more broken down subscores. But that, because those are for all publicly traded companies, and you cannot get away from it, it's not often they're just scraping public databases. This is something that it is impacting companies now and has been impacting companies that are publicly traded for several years. And that's why it's the number one driver. It is not something coming in the future. It's just been the reality for several years. Now, number two, coming on the heels of that, the number two driver are supply chain customers. So if you have a big customer, especially a big brand, and you're in their supply chain, increasingly these weighted ESG scores, they're prioritizing impacts within the supply chain, not just their operations. So say a big company, L'Oreal, Walmart, Nestle, Michelin, Target, Johnson & Johnson, there's several more. There's, I think, 450 big brands, especially in EcoVadis, and using CDP. They are publicly traded, and they are getting scored often poorly based on supply chain management and just lack of transparency or lack of performance. So what they're doing is they're requesting or mandating that some or all of their suppliers disclose their ESG performance, including greenhouse gas emissions. That's usually through CDP, but we're also seeing a lot through EcoVadis. And therefore you get a whole, like several hundred or several thousand smaller, medium enterprises that are often privately held. They're disclosing and being scored because that's how the larger brands are going to improve their ESG scores with their investors and lenders. So it's having a huge ripple effect just from these large supply chain customers wanting to improve their scores. Next is consumers. Just people are asking for it from the consumer market. Once a niche market, it's considered LOHAS. If you haven't heard of it, but it's Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability, LOHAS. And that consumer market was very tiny when it started out, but it's basically who's willing to pay more for things that are socially and environmentally responsible. Today, it represents a $546 billion global market. And you can see Japan and New Zealand, but something to think of for the US and North America is that it's already 23% of the market in the USA, and it's going up 10% annually, which is a nice incline. According to a McKinsey survey, 70% of consumers are willing to pay more for a green product that performs just as well as the non-green product. So that's something called price parity. If they don't cost a lot more, but they're the same quality and they they will choose the other one. So if they have fair price parity, 70%, which is much bigger than the 23, are willing to switch to the more responsible version. And then about half of companies, this is why the consumer market is really strong, is that half of companies surveyed say that their business growth is actually what's driving their sustainability initiatives. That means they're able to enter new markets, offer differentiated or completely new products and services they did not offer before using an ESG or sustainability lens. And so consumers are obviously going to have an impact. Next is talent. I think this is, if you ask me, this is going to be even more important, kind of raising up on the list, at least equal, is that you're struggling. The war for talent is real. It's not going away. And now, not the number one issue. People always care about paying their bills. So, money, salary, and benefits, but often right on the heels in the third or fourth position is this company meeting my values? Is it exciting to work for? Do I believe in what they stand for? Environmentally and socially are usually those key terms. So the 2020 Unily survey, they did 2,000 UK-based office workers. So this is across the pond. But 83% thought their employer was not doing enough to tackle sustainability and climate change, while 65% would prefer working for a company with robust environmental policies. And then IBM's 2002 IBV, Institute for Business Value, they surveyed every year 16,000 employees in 10 countries, and 67% of them were more willing to apply for and accept positions with a company that they felt was quote unquote sustainable. And so this is becoming, again, we're not going to overstate it and say that they'll take a bunch of less money and terrible benefits, but it is a differentiator, especially for top talent, and that are harder and harder positions to recruit. I want to pause because Tracy asked the question, are you familiar with Integrity Next? I am not. And if you want to type in the chat and just send a link or some context around who they are, because I won't be able to Google that in the background. But thank you, Tracy. And then fifth, the North American driver, which a lot of people are surprised by, but regulatory pressure. We have very soft regulation when it comes to international standards. European Union, like I said, South America, Eastern Asia, all are far ahead of us in regulatory pressure. Canada is a little further ahead than the US, but there's just not a lot of teeth in anything except for the mandatory reporting programs, which the GHG RP, which just means greenhouse gas reporting programs. Therefore, a very small amount of very high emitting facilities, mostly energy companies, and that's been around for a very long time. Now, there was a Canadian staff notice that went out, as well as their annual budget proposal with recommendations. Again, no teeth, but mentioning TCFD, which is the Taskforce for climate-related financial disclosures. And TCFD is a framework, not a standard, but it does have 4 different categories of climate-related risks, management issues, and it asks for metrics, but it doesn't tell you which ones. So it's even a soft framework when it comes to the potential frameworks that are out there. And then the US, we don't have any recommendations for TCFD. I would say that the proposed US SEC rules change, which has not gone into effect yet. It's expected to in December, but still has question marks around it. But that's been driving a lot of conversation. But it's really only about greenhouse gas disclosures. It is based off the TCFD as well, not directly, but it does have some TCFD-like qualities. And it is not ESG, it's not broad. So that's not driving broad ESG work. It's only specific to climate change, which is pretty par for the course. Some of the strongest regulations and the most alignment internationally is that the standards have aligned, the frameworks, how you measure greenhouse gas emissions, the targets. There's never been more alignment, and the business community internationally, even recently in a UN survey to thousands of businesses, climate change and climate risks in the supply chain was the #1 economic issue brought up. And so when you know that COVID is also in the mix, that's saying something. So there's never been more agreement on climate change, but like I said, climate is one environmental issue. It's a very important one, but there are lots of other environmental, social, and governance issues that go into like an ESG report or a sustainability report for a company. So integritynext.com. Thank you, Tracy. So the next question, just to poll people where you're at, what is your organization's #1 business driver for ESG and sustainability performance? Do you think it's ESG scores and that you need to improve them? Is it a big supply chain customer or maybe more than one? Is it consumers buying your products? Or if you're not in the consumer market, is it talent and trying to recruit, top talent positions that want to work for you? Or is it regulations? Are you in a regulated market? Or this often happens, you're in the US and Canada, but you do business in Europe. Well, European regulations are going to then be driving some of your decision making. And that definitely is having an impact, but not from US and Canadian regulation for sure. So I'm going to give it a second. Take your time. I will say that I'm only asking for your #1 business driver, but I promise we have multiple business drivers. Sometimes it's all of the above. So it is not unheard of to have 1, 2, 3 key business drivers that all align when you're approaching your ESG scores and wanting to improve them. All right, I still see some people coming in, so I will give it just a few more seconds. Give you a 5 countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you for everyone who participated. And so there's a nice balance. Supply chain customers, I think that's great to see, is that, and we'll talk about that with EcoVadis as one example. It's not the only one, but why that's becoming what I call the EcoVadis effect. It's certainly changing the game. So some of the scores themselves are not actually a big driver for this group. Consumers, regulation, and nothing on talent. Like I said, that's not surprising, but I think possibly that's because people haven't really given it a close enough look, but also that it's going to continue to grow. So I expect talent to be more in the future. Hold on just a second. There's some great questions coming in. So driving more / new business is a key driver. Thank you. Someone who maybe didn't get to put their poll question in. How do you measure sustainability for a small factory in Canada and 85% imported goods? So Rosa, thanks for the question. I'm going to tell you that my answer to almost everything is it depends. And I want you to bring this back up at the end, but it depends on who your stakeholders are and who's defining performance for you. So sustainability itself, it depends on the material issues that you identify. It depends on the weighting that you give each, social issues versus environmental issues. Because sustainability, the way I'm using it today, I'm using it broadly to mean E, S, and G, environmental, social, and governance issues for the company. And that means also, impacts and influence not only on the company, but in the world. So what is the business doing? So we're going to break that down in probably tedious detail. So, and then Tracy said our customer requested that we register for Integrity Next, as EcoVadis has a fee associated. Okay, so Integrity Next is an example or maybe a competitor of EcoVadis. So we're a small company with limited resources searching for other resources to help us get started on assessing our current baseline and to develop, implement, and improve. So that's fantastic, especially if there are, competition is pretty good. Sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. People also complain and criticize ESG because they wish there was just one standard, but that is not the way it's going. So I think that there needs to be some cost-effective solutions at every level. So I'll look into Integrity Next, and thank you before I move on. Okay, so I'm going to touch on frameworks and standards right before I go into the ESG scores in detail, but I want you to have some firm understanding, and it matters. And why it matters is that there's growing international alignment on the expected ESG and sustainability reporting best practices like there has never been before. Is it perfect? No. But for someone who's been in this field for 20 years, it's never been more aligned. And in the near future, it's going to continue to just be really fine-tuned. There are no big, crazy changes happening. It's a lot of fine-tuning right now, and they're all aligning with each other on purpose to make it easier for businesses to participate and report. All stakeholders, not just investors and lenders, they want consistency in reporting for comparison, because what has been missing is not great storytelling, but it's been comparison. And that's what definitely investors and lenders want. They want to say, that's nice, but anybody can market their own program. I want to see how are you doing in these KPIs that we think are important, and are you doing better or worse than your competitors? And that's really been a focus. And so similar to third-party verification and assurance, these ESG rating agencies are now giving higher scores and often higher weighting of scores if you're following one or more international standards. So they're saying, great, report to us, and we will give you credit for that, but it is self-reporting. Now we need to see some sort of verification assurance, and often that is in the form of these ESG standards. So aligning with a standard and reporting in compliance with a standard. And so we'll talk about that. But you actually get your scores to increase if you have the same data, but it is following a standard and it is reported consistently with that standard. All for the reason of comparison. So I hope that makes sense. Here is my best graphic to help you out. So ESG frameworks, the alphabet soup of ESG. When people talk about frameworks and standards, they're talking about the highest level. Frameworks and standards are internationally agreed upon. They're usually open source. You can see all the details. There's nothing proprietary about them. You cannot change the standard, but there's no shortage of detail on what went into making the standard, the process for changing the standard, and everything that's included in the standard itself. The most common ones are GRI, the Global Reporting Index, Sustainable Development Goals, SASB, Integrated Reporting Framework. We'll talk about all of these. I highlight down here, if we were doing a climate change specific webinar, ISO 14064 is the climate change standard, but again, it's not ESG. It's down in the weeds. It's one single environmental issue. It's not an ESG framework. And TCFD, same thing. It's only applying to climate change. So it is not considered an ESG or sustainability framework or standard, but it is a standard and a framework for climate change. So I'm going to run through this. I think pictures and analogies help. So we're going to talk about the Sandbox. April said, do you offer services to help a company improve their EcoVadis score and get organized in their ESG improvements in accordance with the EcoVadis requirements? I feel like you're throwing me a softball, April. You do not work for SGS, so I'll point that out to everybody. Yes, we work in every agency. I can tell you, like, just a recent example, like Meredith Corporation, a big media company. In 19 months, we were able to they just wanted help with their environment score. So you can work on pieces of the score or the whole thing. But in 19 months, they went from a 10 in their environment score, which is like a decile ranking, is like bottom 10%. And they went to a number 1 in the media industry, just from being more transparent and improving performance. And it took 19 months to go from the last 10% to the top 10%. And so that's ISS. I know that we have worked with MSCI clients. We worked with Sustainalytics clients. I'm pretty sure, you asked specifically about EcoVadis. Yes, recently with an auto manufacturer, EcoVadis, I'm going to show you all of them soon. We have a similar approach, but we at SGS, I think one of the benefits of having experts is we're familiar with all of them and we have a global presence. So we have multiple experts who have worked not only in industries, but know the inner workings and the differences between the rating agencies, because they are not the same. And they can change every year, so which I'll talk about later. And really quick, Jim said, would you consider SMETA 4-pillar an ESG standard? In a way, yes, probably, Jim. It's a struggle, and I only say this because SMETA is what we see is a lot of people only do SMETA with the 2 pillars. The required 2 pillars are really just a social audit, but if you did a 4-pillar audit, it has the 3rd pillar is environmental and the 4th pillar is governance, and so in a way, it's both a framework and a standard that you're auditing to. So yes, I would consider SMETA before a SMETA 4-pillar. It confuses people because most people are only familiar with or only participate in the 2 pillars that are required. But I would agree with you. It's a really good point. So thanks for bringing that up. Now I'm going to give you an analogy. It's just for helpful remembrance. And here we go. The Global Reporting Initiative is what I'm going to tell you is the Sandbox. It's the whole Sandbox. But if you're familiar with, putting your report together every year, imagine you've got the bucket and you're going to put your sand in it, and every grain of sand is one of the million KPIs or the million data points for ESG or sustainability that you could be considering. And there's a lot. You're never going to put it all in your bucket. You can't. And the materiality shovel, that's the thing that you decide what sand are you going to put in your bucket to show people. Sometimes it's helpful in these frameworks. They'll draw a line in the sand and say like, hey, this sand over here looks like economic sand. So we're only talking about economic KPIs with financial results. Here are some social KPIs and metrics. These all look social in nature. So at least it helps you get your bearings. And then these are environmental, but it doesn't actually give you the answer. It just helps you organize your thinking. And frameworks are typically those lines in the sand. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to know they've been around for a long time. GRI is a framework and a standard. It's for investors and the public. And so it's both what's good for the business, but also what's good for the world and society, and what are the impacts that the business has in the world. They have 3 categories: economic, social, and environment. There's 34 different potential topics, 155 potential metrics, and they explain how to do a materiality assessment, and you only choose the relevant topics and metrics that work for your company. You never have to do everything. You can choose to do all of it, but it's overkill. There's at least 5,000 organizations and growing using it, and 63% of the largest 100 companies. That's growing a lot faster now that it's basically baked into the European Green Deal. So GRI is not going away. And like I said, it's the whole sandbox. It's a huge, everything in the kitchen sink, but there's an instruction manual for how to get the things you need out of it. But they try not to leave anything out. It's a criticism, but also a value of GRI. It's just really broad. Then in 2000, the UN Sustainable Development Goals came out. It's a framework and a standard, which means the framework is the structure, but the standard is actual down to KPIs. It is very government, national, state, regional specific, and public. It has some corporate stuff in it, but we'll talk about, they're trying to shift, but they've never been a super strong fit for corporate. They have 17 goals or topics, 169 metrics. Over 12,500 organizations are using it. A lot of those are government agencies, but a lot of companies, I'll just be honest, what we see is it's an afterthought. You do your materiality assessment with a different standard, and then you slap in the logos where you see it being relevant, but not a lot of people use the inherent tools. There is a mapping exercise, an impact mapping and an impact assessment exercise that the UN SDGs come with. It's very valuable, but I see less people doing that and instead just putting the logo in the report. I'm just telling you, not a judgment, it's just like what we see, but it is not built very strongly for corporate. And think about it as the kid with the cape. They're coming in with one shovel, but it's really the world, like idealist, what's good for the world. They're not doing a corporate business impact assessment at all. They're saying, how do we solve these persistent global challenges that are environmental and social in nature? Then in 2009, the Integrated Reporting Framework came out. It's only a framework. It breaks it down for investors, for your annual reporting. They said stop. They basically said, don't put a separate ESG sustainability report out. Put in one report and put in the material issues, environmentally and socially, and governance into that one report, and stop separating them, and also break it down by capital. So basically translate your social, environment, and governance issues into capital and put dollar signs or currency values to it. They only give example metrics. It's kind of a throwaway, but those capitals are natural, social, financial, relational, manufacturing, and intellectual property. I think I got them right. And again, it's like the nerd, the kid with the calculator, business only. They're not looking at any problems of the world. They're not trying to solve social and environmental issues. They're looking at, is this material to our business? Does it impact the business specifically? Jacqueline, I will pause because I saw you come through with, how do you compare or work directly with EcoVadis and carriers? Let me bring that up when we're on the EcoVadis slide, because I'll go into some detail. So great question, but I want you to be able to see some of the scoring mechanism so that you'll understand it. Not trying to push you off. I just think it'll be easier with the visuals. And then SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, founded in 2011. It's a framework and a standard. It's only for investors. It's only about business impacts. or impacts on the business. There's 11 sectors, 77 industry-specific standards. So basically, they went through 77 industries and did a materiality assessment of their own making, and they created a much shorter, done for you. You can literally pull up a PDF. It's very long and turn to page 6. It's almost always page 6, and there is a chart, and it just lists the metrics. And so there's 1,078 potential metrics, but if you pull up your industry and it's a strong fit for you, if you're not like a multidisciplinary business, if you fit well in their sector, on average, they only have 5 topics and 13 metrics per industry. So they're trying to make it easier for companies to say, these are the most material, but again, it's from a business risk standpoint, not trying to solve any social or environmental problems of the world. And so not as inspirational. That's one thing I'll point out, that these are not going to get you a lot of customer and consumer loyalty who believe you're like a saving the world type of a thing. These are very investor focused audience type of reports. There's a lot of people using them because they're so easy. But if you think about the analogy, it's your parents filled your bucket for you and said, here you go, honey. You don't even have to scoop. We got you a bucket. And it's very helpful, but you might not like the sand that they put in it. And that's one criticism of SASB. TCFD, like we talked about, Taskforce on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, started in 2015. It's only a framework, only for investors. And like I said, it's just categorical. They say report on your governance of climate. And I'm only throwing these in here because climate is so top of mind for everyone. It's not ESG, it is climate, not even environmental, it's climate. And so governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. But like I said, they do not give you the targets and metrics that you should align with. It's unknown to us. I've looked. It's hard to say who all is reporting to the TCFD framework. But if you think about it, it's just the big green ball. It's not even the green sand. It's the one green ball in the environmental category that everybody's playing with. And there's an instruction manual for it. And then on emissions, this is a standard that you verify to. So this is the actual, like, how do you measure it and how do you get your results? This is the technical stuff. And it is for investors and the public. A lot of people are doing GHG accounting for organizations, for projects, and for products. And you can actually be accredited and get certified to this. SGS is big in the accredited certification verification world. We do a lot of greenhouse gas verifications. The change, what used to be the standard, but it was not an accredited standard that you could actually get an accredited certificate for. It's indirect scope 3 emissions are now mandatory. And the GHG protocol you used to have, which is very popular, it's still used for a lot of accounting principles, but they made scope 3 completely optional. And that's really not acceptable anymore. In most parts of the world, they expect some sort of materiality assessment at the scope 3 level, which is in your supply chain, your value chain. Again, it's unknown how many people are using it, thousands. I know we have thousands of clients, so it's more than that. And again, this is the same big green ball, but instead of a framework, it's a very specific technical standard of how to measure how big your green ball is and how much impact it's having in the world. So this is the useful breakdown because, like I said, the alignment is happening. This is why everyone is in a lot more agreement than they've ever been. In several years, 3-4 years ago, integrated reporting foundation combined with SASB, who combined with the TCFD, and they all went into the value reporting foundation. And then only a few years later, which I think was the end goal, is they fine-tuned that process because they're all talking to investors. It's very consistent. So they combined the framework, the high-level framework, the high-level standard, and then the high-level framework for climate, and they put it all into one. And now it's absorbed into the International Financial Reporting Standards. So the International Financial Reporting Standards are now integrating all of those. And it's never been more aligned for investors, where GRI is not going to go away from their public. They said, hey, we're interested in the social and environmental problems that businesses also inflict on the world, and that they need to be responsible for the impacts on the world, not just for the world's impacts on the business. And so this is where a lot of the customer loyalty and the inspirational brand value comes from, is GRI has it. Now, what they've tried to do is make it easier for businesses because they've listened and they've aligned, they play very nicely together. And so they're doing sector standards. I think 44 are planned, maybe 40. and they're rolling those out in sectors so that you don't have to go through all of GRI. You can kind of skip ahead and do your done for you sector analysis. And GRI is just going to include that moving forward. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are changing. They actually rolled out kind of a separate thing called SDG Impact. I'll tell you, it's really targeting corporations, but what I've seen, the initial pieces are it's more of helping private equity, corporate equity flow to third world countries to where some of these UN Sustainable Development Goals are furthest behind. It's not as strong. I don't think SDG Impact is as many resources for helping the company look at its own internal operations. It's more about how do you invest in additional areas or expand your business to serve certain areas in third world countries that have potential business benefits, but it's pretty unique. So check it out. But it is, again, trying to make tools for corporations. I think the UN MDGs were 2000, the SDGs, correct. So John, I said it started in the 2000. They morphed. So every 15 years, they reset these. It's a very good point. They were first called the Millennium Development Goals. Then they kind of said, hey, we did what we could. Here's where we were in 15 years. Then they added up to 17. And those will change. I don't know if they'll be called the SDGs after 2030, but it's the same organization, it's the same process. And so you're very right. They were called the MDGs. Who knows what they'll be called? Maybe they'll be called the ESG goals, but I doubt it. But they will change in 2030 because they're always on a 15-year cycle. And then John also said, are many of these standards and frameworks applied at the project scale? This seems possible with SDGs, but I'm curious is another as well. Most of these are high level. The only one at a project level is the climate-based stuff is very project driven. Most of these are company level, organizational level. You're trying to identify your material issues and report on the most important things. That's what ESG and sustainability standards do. And that's why the ESG scoring and rating agencies use them. They want to score you on the most relevant or material topics, not on every single little thing. They want the scoring to reflect what is most relevant per industry and per company. So again, great questions. So what is your organization's #1 standard, if anything, that you're trying to align with in your own work? So are any of these more top of mind for you and your leadership at your organization? And then I promise we'll be switching. The whole last of it is going to dive into the rating agencies, but we need to understand that these are going to affect your scores, and the rating agencies are also trying to align as the standards align. Even though they're proprietary, these rating agencies are still also want to be relevant, and they're competing against each other as well. So there's never been more drive for them to be aligned, and we'll talk about some of the ways that they're aligned as well. So we've got several folks doing it. I'll give you about 5 more seconds to think about it. What is your #1 standard you think you're trying to align with? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everybody that answered. So this is not uncommon. The UN SDGs, I would say they're the most accessible. They don't require you use a lot of their tools, although I will say they have some great tools. GHG protocol, it's a technical standard. It's also, it's project-based, and you might not even have ESG scores, so you can definitely access this one a little more. GRI, SASB, nobody on the integrated reporting, nobody on the TCFD, which is kind of interesting, but it's not a shock, honestly. I'm a little surprised SASB isn't more so because it's so easy, but again, that's one of the criticisms is you might not like what they ended up with for their material topics and their KPIs. And James, thank you. That's a good point. I could have added, I think we did that for some of the previous ones, adding other to this poll because we might have had some other folks. But I think the thing I probably would have done is just taken the climate change off of there because that's really not fair. You're comparing ESG global standards for a whole organization across some very specific climate related, but we could also add that other. So it's a good point, James, thank you. And this diagram suggests that GRI is also for investors. Do investors favor VRF and SASB, soon to be ISSB or GRS? because it's tailored to their audience. So I think you said GRI. So GRI is also for investors. It really, to pretend that investors is a monolithic group. There's a whole nother webinar that we could do on this, but it's basically an evolution. And we do, just for your information, check out SGS Academy. We have amazing training on all of this. But there's been an evolution from like impact investing, which is just purely sort of spending your money where you want to make an impact in the world. You're not really necessarily going to get a financial return. That's not why you're doing it. You certainly can. Social responsible investing kind of has also been around parallel, but sort of evolved, where it went from negative screenings, purely, we won't invest in these things, has added in the potential of positive screenings. We will only invest in these things, or a mix. Where now ESG investing is indexed investing. It's actually using composite scores about broad environmental, social, and governance performance. So it's never been more specific and detailed, but there's still competition. Which score do you use? Some people just adopt one of like Sustainalytics, or they adopt EcoVadis, and some still use their own proprietary method. And so it's all happening. So when you say investors, there are some investors that, yes, absolutely, GRI is in full alignment. To be fair, GRI came first. Most of these are stealing from GRI and then whittling it down to what they think is more important. GRI was like the first and the Sandbox, and then people started playing in the Sandbox and making it easier and said, well, skip ahead, don't do all this, like we did it for you. But GRI is sort of the background fundamental starting block of all of these, and it does not leave out, like I said, if some investor groups have sort of an SRI, socially responsible, or an impact investing bent to their particular group, then yes, they definitely also want GRI. And it's kind of, if you don't think customer loyalty and talent are an issue, you're probably not paying attention. And GRI is the only standard, as well as the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that can provide that benefit. The others are just not designed for anything inspirational. And once you look into them, you see it's not that they don't kind of tangentially touch it, but they're not that. They're designed specifically for the impact on the business, not for the impact of the business on society or the globe. So great questions. SASB, VRF, all of that, definitely the investors are looking at it more consistently. That's where the alignment is happening in the institutional investor world, Michael. So yes, definitely. Now, if we talk about the rating agencies, this is when you're actually going to get a performance score. All those standards, it's a framework and it's a standard of KPIs. They do not measure performance whatsoever. And that's when people kind of get upset about them. It's like, they are not telling you you need to be any particular way. There is no judgment involved. ESG rating agencies, it's all judgment. They are scoring you with a number, actually, we'll talk about how they score you, but they are definitely a value judgment on what is more valuable, what is less valuable. It's often in management system, transparency, and performance. And CDP is going to be thrown in here, but like I said, it is not an ESG rating agency. It is a carbon climate rating agency. They also have water and they also have forests, but the uptick in the use of those is far, far lower than the climate questionnaire. So I'm still talking about them in the scope of climate. So really quick, to put them in in some relevance to each other, you can ignore the Dow Jones. It's for only the 300 largest companies. So you're not going to have any impact there unless you're one of those 300 largest companies. But MSCI is Morgan Stanley. They have 85,000 different organizations today that they've scored. They started in 1990. ISS, they have 11,500 organizations they've scored. They started in 1997, but they were just a governance piece, and they bought like 7 years ago. That's an estimate, I'm not exact, but they bought an E and an S rating agency from, I think, Europe, and they've absorbed that only in the last 5 years. So they're sort of new to the E, S, and G ratings. CDP, again, it's been around since 2000, 13,000 organizations because climate is so top of mind. Sustainalytics did not branch off of any of these others. You can see that MSCI, Dow Jones, ISS, they all existed ahead of time. They were already doing work, and then they added the E and the S. They were doing governance, they added E and S. Sustainalytics started fresh. They were only an ESG sustainability rating agency, and they're at 20,000 organizations. In 1992 they started. And this is what I call the EcoVadis effect. They have 90,000 organizations, and they didn't start until 2007. We have Integrity Next as a possible competitor, but they are definitely it. Right now, they're sort of it in the marketplace because of what I said before, because the large brands have pressure to improve their supply chain scores, and they see EcoVadis as one of the only ways to do that. EcoVadis not only has a scoring mechanism, but they have a survey tool. So it's actually kind of doing double duty. A lot of people then use the survey tools that you can customize in EcoVadis. I'm not trying to sell them. We don't get any benefit from this. I'm just telling you who they are. But why they've had such an uptick is because of the pressure from customers. The supply chain partners jump in at 100 or 1,000 at a time, and then they use those custom tools. So that's it feels like they're getting a service, and they're semi-private scores. What does that mean? All the others, it's public. I can go to them and look up your score. You cannot do that with EcoVadis. The client, the large brand customer, they can look up your score if they requested that you join and that you agree to submit your disclosures to them. So there is sharing that way with just the large brand partner, and you get to see your score, but you have to log in and you have to be a member, and you can't see other companies' scores unless you're in that relationship agreed upon with them. So there is a lot more of taking down those barriers to entry where people feel more comfortable. They see it as a business relationship, and they don't feel like they're being pressured externally from the public on their scores. So we call it the helicopter parents. Like, this is the group, they are judging you. There's no question. They're watching what you do. You might not like them or think that they have a place to judge you, but they're doing it, and they're in the playground watching the sandbox. They are the playground police. So what is, I think something, nope, it didn't skip, sorry. I thought I had a nice little slide here. Maybe it's coming later, so I'll tell you at the end. Here's a snapshot of what you'll see. They are not only are they proprietary and weighted scores that are not consistent, but they are not consistent in the way they deliver that score to you. There is MSCI is a credit rating, so it's from CCC, the lowest, to AAA, the highest. But you'll see that this distribution, they batch you into an industry, so you are compared against your peers, and they show where you show up, in this particular thing. Are you high or low within your industry? Because you can have a really low score, but if your industry is not performing well against their criteria, you still might be a leader against your peers. Doesn't mean you have a good score, but it's definitely something. Companies are usually looking at this first to see, are we being outcompeted, less about does this score make us look bad or look good. ISS, they're using the report card version from an A+ to a D-, but they're giving you that industry relative performance against your peers as well. Sustainalytics, theirs is a numerical risk score. Don't ask me why, but it only goes from a scale of 0 to 50. And so if you're in 20 to 30 starts to be medium. If you're in your 30s, high, and in your 40s, that's the worst. It's a severe risk score. So the higher the score, the worse you are, 0 to 50. Don't ask me why. But again, down here, you see industry against your peers. In a group of 601 similar companies, you're 346. Now that switches, and we go to the EcoVadis effect. Again, you can't see this. Everything I showed on the previous slide, you can go look it up. You can go to their website, type in the ticker or the name of a company and see their score. You cannot see these. So this is just a sample. An overall score of 42 and 42 out of 100. So they're doing 0 to 100, seems fair. They give you a percentile of where you are ranking, but then also show you where you are in your industry rank, like the others. And higher is better. 42, 43 is better than 42, 0 is bad, 100 is great. But they break it down in subscores with environment, and they show you what the weighting is here with a visual cue. That environment for this particular company or this industry is very high. Labor and human rights, you could say social, is very high, and they're a 40. Ethics, I would call this governance, is also very high, but it's weighted much lower. You can see it's only got 2 dots. And then you got 3 dots on sustainable procurement, which is their way of saying your supply chain score. So what's funny is if this is a big brand like Target, for instance, there's Walmart, Michelin, L'Oreal, all the ones we said, there's 250 some brands that are in this now, big brands. If this is Target, Target is looking at this as their supply chain score, and they want to improve it. So that this score, if you can see my mouse, the sustainable procurement score for Target is made up of all of these other 3 scores for all of their suppliers. So their smaller supplier, they're looking at their environment, labor, human rights, and ethics score, and those combined make up the sustainable procurement score, or a big component of it, for Target. So that's how these scores play into one another. They're usually a request or a mandate, and that's why thousands of private SMEs are joining. I will say this on behalf of these large brands, they're not too strict right now. What you'll see is a bare minimum. If you have a terrible, like the worst of the worst scores, they may not work with you. But they're trying to get their bearings and say like, well, how are the scores? Some of them have done positive incentives where the highest ranking scores are actually getting some sort of discounted rate of business or increase in, financial benefit. Those are less common. But over time, as the brands get more familiar with the scores and understand what's possible, they're going to start seeing more incentives in place. So that's what to expect as this goes on. And that's just kind of where we're at. I throw CDP in there just for a comparison, but again, this is climate. It's completely unrelated from the others, but it's a very similar methodology. This is a grade report, like your report card, but they have these leadership, management, awareness, and disclosure. It's basically like you get a D if you're not doing anything, if you're not being transparent. You actually get no score if you're not being transparent, I'm sorry. If you disclose it all, you get a D. If you have knowledge of the impacts and you can disclose, not just like, I don't know. If you actually know some of the answers, then you get Cs. Then if you have management systems in place for these issues, you get Bs. And A is when you actually have performance. So it's very unique. It's not a linear thing. They're more of like scoring you in stages of your growth in how you manage climate. And last is performance. So that's what CDP is all about. Again, similar but different. And here's what it looks like. All of them have this maintain and improve reality to them, that if you like your score, you can't be complacent, because you have to be proactive just to maintain that score, let alone improve it. Why? Because they all have commonalities. They have single composite scores at the end of the day. But if you are the company, and those are public, if you are the company, you can log in and you can either request from your representative or you can download a report. That's why I say they're all aligning with each other. You can see your subscores by category, and you can get to know exactly sort of some of the details of why you scored poorly. They won't give you their full algorithm, but they give you some broad strokes, categorical feedback on this is why you scored bad. And they all have peer comparisons by industry, and that's the important piece. Because of that comparison, the impact is that most companies are now working to improve their ESG scores relative to the competitors, because these are public. Anybody can see them. Any journalist can go out and do a best of or a worst of list of any industry. And if you stand still, your ranking with that industry will certainly drop on that chart that shows you within the industry. And sometimes your overall score as well is going to drop just by the nature of its performance-based. And as standards continue to align and improve, they might up the standard and say, well, now this is basically business as usual. We're going to change our ranking. And you don't get to decide and participate in most of the ESG scoring agencies or rating agencies. That's where they're privately held, and they're proprietary algorithms. And it's not like a standard where you can get on a working group and submit changes and go through it and get approved. They do it or they don't do it. That's it. The rating agencies are not participatory for your business. So that's why it's a maintain and improve mentality for these scores. So which agency do you believe is the most reputable with your investors and or stakeholders? And I'll throw back to to the earlier question, I could have had an other. I'm sorry that I don't, but please submit your scores for that. And I'll use the last few minutes for questions as I break this down. But there is a final slide on how to improve your scores, but it's just going to be a summary of exactly what we talked about and how you can affect change on those scores specifically. And I want to go back because I know that, Jacqueline, I might back up after we get all the answers here and just go show you the EcoVadis, because you asked, how do you compare or work directly with EcoVadis carriers? All right, got a good sense in. I'm going to give 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so a lot of folks. So we probably got a lot of supply chain folks as well, but you might just like that they have the semi-private nature of their score. I'll say they haven't been around as much. So just as a professional, are they reputable? Yes. I hesitate because some of these have been they've been improving their rating system for like 20 years. And EcoVadis has been, it's like the youngest kid in the block. That's why people like Integrity Next are trying to compete, because some people don't like their methodology or they disagree with it. But it's a nice balance here. A lot of folks use EcoVadis, so thank you. I want to back up quick and just to your question on EcoVadis. That was Jacqueline. How we compare, we have to, because of the nature of this, we also, we respect the system. We don't like buy people's scores. That's impossible. We would have to partner with a company and they would share with us their scores. And so we would work with you directly to, based on what you're willing to share with us, we would improve those scores. And we would just look at your past performance. We would be able to tell you with pretty strong confidence what's going to happen from the weighting and the consistency. But if you were told, for instance, sometimes they will say, well, we were told by our brand partner or by our customer that we rank, here's who we're ranking against. And maybe they shared some of that if they're allowed to. I'm not actually sure what the rules are because they change sometimes, but whatever they were allowed to disclose to you, if you share that with us, then we could work off of it. But there is, because of the non-public nature of this, we do typically with EcoVadis really just focus on what's your company's strategy and how do we move the needle for you in each of these categories. And that's just what's allowed by the system. And I'll tell you that this matters. So where are you in your 5-stage journey? Are you just starting out understanding your trends and issues? Are you defining your material risks and opportunities? And are you setting KPIs, goals, and planning? Because this is where you need to know which standards, all the questions you've asked and been asked and answered today, that's what you would use. And you would not use every standard under the sun. You would use the ones that are most relevant to your business, your industry, based on your stakeholders. And then you would define materiality, risks, and opportunities based on that and set your KPIs and goals and do planning to move the needle. But that's all in the strategy phase. Then you actually have to implement your initiatives and projects. You have to do something different, especially if you want to get the higher boost. You can get a boost in your score from transparency, not only from just reporting alone, that gets you points, but from reporting management systems that are in place. And so that's very strategic. But then eventually your best scores are going to come from improving performance. And you have to implement new initiatives and projects to improve actual performance. And then you want to disclose. Stage 5 is where you're actually going out to these different entities and saying either, hey, did you miss something? Like, did you see this report? It's publicly available. Or, hey, we want to submit an index. We have all of this stored for you. Here's a GRI index or a SASB index or something that makes the reporting entity, the agency itself, have on hand all the answers it needs to evaluate your performance and not miss anything to give you the highest score possible. So that is a cycle that happens over and over again, strategy to implementation, back to strategy. And that's really what determines how you do it. But this is what you need to do. The only way to improve your scores, and this is something we help companies with all the time, is in stage 1, you have to establish a governance structure and build those internal competencies with training. Yes, hire someone like SGS, will never tell you not to, but you need to have internal competencies. We provide training if you want us for that. Define material risks and opportunities. You need to prioritize which are the ESG rating agencies you actually want to improve your scores. You can improve one or more scores, or you can do none, but you need to know which ones. They are not the same. And then you can dive into their methodology and compare them against an actual strategy. Don't just chase points. Make sure it aligns with your actual core business strategy, and that's something we can help with, because then you need to set your roadmap. What are your short, medium, and long-term things that you're going to do on that horizon? And it's going to be in multiple categories. So you need to understand E, S, and G. What are those short, medium, and long-term horizons, targets? What are you going to try to improve? Because it's not going to happen overnight. But like I said, we've definitely helped companies move quickly. And then last, establish leadership, data, analytics, and then benchmark against those standards. Here is a kind of a summary. Know your drivers, know your frameworks, know your rating agencies, and then know what stage of the initiative you're in. And I wanted to just say, we have this training to offer you. If you go to SGS Academy, that's the short cliff notes. We have ESG and sustainability training, all broken down for your role in the company, and very specific training on which things to do. And definitely 5-star rating on our courses, great feedback on all of them. And we continue to get better and listen every time to make them as hard-hitting and valuable as possible. We also have ESG solutions. If you want to hire us for a service like many of you have actually asked for, we do climate action and ESG sustainability solutions across the board, advisory and assessments. And then that's it. So I apologize, I went a minute or so over. I hope it was valuable. And I'm willing to stay on for a few more minutes to take questions, but you might have to jump. So thanks to Kim, thanks to Summer, who was in the background doing technical stuff, and thanks to all of you for carving time out of your day. I always find that I'm pressed at the end when I answer questions as we go through and not save them till the end. But you asked really good questions, so I wanted to let you know. Any questions you have? All right, I don't see any more. Unless Kim or someone else sees, I just want to say thank you again. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to us at SGS for help. That's why we're here. And good luck in your ESG and sustainability journeys. Have a great day.